They had marched for years across Europe, from the muddy trenches of the Eastern Front to the shattered cities of the West, their stomachs gnawed by hunger and rations barely enough to sustain life. When German soldiers were captured by American forces in 1943 and 1944, they carried the expectation of yet more hardship. They had heard rumors about the enemy, cold, harsh, unforgiving. Yet nothing could have prepared them for the first glimpse of an American POW camp. As they disembarked from crowded transport ships, their gaunt faces reflected more than exhaustion. Hunger had followed them across the Atlantic, a constant companion through every battle and retreat. In their minds, the rations of the Third Reich had been meager at best, often less than 1,200 calories per day, sometimes just bread and watery soup. Soldiers whispered among themselves, comparing memories of famine with grim determination. The barracks they entered were orderly, clean, and surprisingly spacious. Guards moved quietly, their demeanor professional rather than cruel. Prisoners noticed the first hint of unease. These captors were different. In the mess hall, long wooden tables stretched across the room, and the smell of hot bread and cooked meat hung in the air. Some POWs paused at the threshold, unsure whether to step forward. Their eyes widened at the sight of trays stacked high with steaming portions of food, each plate heavy with calories unimaginable to men who had endured starvation for months, even years. One prisoner later wrote in a declassified letter from a camp in Texas, "This can't be one meal." Men who had fought and suffered in the harsh winters of Russia now faced a different kind of shock. It was not bullets or barbed wire, but abundance itself. They observed the variety: milk, eggs, fresh bread, vegetables, even dessert. A simple slice of cake seemed almost unreal to those who had not tasted sugar in months. In hushed tones, they asked each other if this was truly for them, if it could be possible that the enemy would feed them so generously. As they ate, some of the older soldiers began to realize that this was more than nourishment. It was a statement, subtle yet powerful. While they had been taught that Americans were ruthless and wasteful, here was proof of something else: logistical mastery, industrial strength, and a home front capable of sustaining not just an army, but the enemies it captured. Conversations around the tables were tentative at first, words breaking into reluctant laughter or disbelief. The act of eating became almost ceremonial, a mixture of relief, suspicion, and quiet awe. Those who had known only hunger now tasted an abundance that highlighted everything they had lost in the war. Letters sent home described more than food. They conveyed astonishment, a quiet reverence for a system so capable that it could nourish even the men who had fought against it. The journey across the Atlantic had brought them far from the battlefields, but it had also brought them face to face with a reality that words could scarcely describe. Hunger had been a constant companion, but here, for the first time, it was met not with contempt or cruelty, but with a table full of enough to sustain life. Even as they finished the first bites, some POWs could not help but glance around at their companions, sharing looks of quiet disbelief. This was a beginning, a first chapter in a story that would challenge every expectation they had carried from Europe, a story told not with weapons, but with food. And in those early days, it left an impression no hardship of the past could erase.
The first footsteps inside the American POW camp carried a mixture of caution, fatigue, and disbelief. For months, even years, these men had known only hunger, harsh discipline, and the endless march of war. They had imagined captivity as a continuation of that suffering: meager rations, strict confinement, cold barracks. What they found instead was something entirely unexpected. The camp was orderly, almost calm, with soldiers moving with purpose, but without the harshness they had been trained to fear. Guards treated them with a courtesy that was almost unsettling. Whispers spread quickly among the new arrivals. Could it really be true that their captors were not here to punish them, but to feed them? In the mess hall, the truth revealed itself. Long tables were stacked with trays, plates heaped with steaming portions of meat, vegetables, and bread still warm from the oven. Milk and eggs accompanied the meal, and even simple desserts appeared on side tables. The air smelled of baked bread and roasting meat, an aroma so unfamiliar and intense it made men stop mid-step. One prisoner later described the scene in a letter home. "This can't be one meal." Many reached for food tentatively, as though unsure if it was allowed. Some laughed nervously, others exchanged wide-eyed glances, the shock visible on faces worn by famine. Conversation was cautious at first. Men whispered, asking if this could truly be for them, if they would be allowed to eat as much as they wished. Plates of steak, mounds of potatoes, fresh vegetables, and bread were not rationed. There was abundance everywhere, and yet no threat accompanied it. As they ate, a quiet understanding began to form. This was more than a meal. It was a lesson in logistics and a demonstration of American industrial and agricultural strength. While Europe struggled to feed its armies, these men had stumbled into a system capable of sustaining even its enemies. Older soldiers recognized the subtle power of the act. Here, in a mess hall, ideology met reality. Propaganda about the ruthlessness and scarcity of the American home front crumbled with each bite. For the first time, prisoners could experience a world where survival did not depend on scarcity, where food was plentiful and care was provided even to those who had been enemies. Some began to notice the human side of their captors. Smiles, nods of reassurance, and patient instruction in how to queue, serve, and eat created an environment unfamiliar to the European soldier. Letters and later memoirs reflected this shift. Men wrote not just of the food itself, but of the shock and the lessons it carried. Abundance could be a weapon as powerful as any rifle or artillery shell, not by destruction, but by revealing the difference between industrial might and deprivation. By the end of the first meal, the soldiers were no longer certain of anything they had assumed about captivity or about the world outside their European experience. The mess hall, with its long tables, overflowing trays, and the quiet, orderly American soldiers overseeing it, became a symbol. It was a symbol of power, of order, and of humanity expressed through sustenance. In that moment, the men realized they were witnesses to something beyond nourishment. They were learning through plates and portions a lesson about a nation whose resources, organization, and priorities had the capacity to surprise, sustain, and ultimately outmatch everything they had known in the war. The shock of the first meal would linger, not merely as a memory of food, but as a quiet recognition of a world they had never imagined, a world where hunger could be met not with cruelty, but with care.
The mess hall had become more than a place to eat. It was a classroom of sorts, teaching lessons in abundance and the scale of American power. German POWs, many of whom had survived on a single slice of bread or watery soup for days, stared at the portions before them with disbelief. One plate alone often exceeded what they had eaten in an entire day back in Europe. The meals were carefully balanced: protein from steak and eggs, carbohydrates from potatoes and bread, fresh vegetables to restore missing nutrients, and even dessert to provide calories and morale. Records from U.S. Army quartermaster reports show that the average daily intake in these camps could surpass 3,600 calories, 3 times what a soldier in the collapsing Third Reich might expect. Some POWs measured each bite in disbelief, calculating silently how such quantities could exist, how the food could remain fresh, how there was enough for everyone. Conversations erupted at the tables, half in astonishment, half in secret envy for their comrades who were now getting what they had long been denied. Older men recalled the long marches in freezing rain, the hunger that gnawed through their ribs, the moments when survival seemed impossible. Now, in this hall, abundance challenged everything they had believed about the world and their enemy.
Food became a tangible reminder of the industrial might of the United States. It was not just nourishment, it was proof of a nation capable of producing more than it could consume, capable of feeding armies and civilians alike, capable even of sustaining its prisoners with dignity. For the POWs, the act of eating became a psychological turning point. Hunger had defined their days, shaped their decisions, and hardened their outlooks. Now, full plates and overflowing trays forced them to confront a reality they had never imagined. Scarcity was not universal, and care for even captured enemies was possible. Some men began to write letters home, describing not only the food, but the bewildering efficiency of its delivery. They marveled at the organization of the kitchens, the supply chain stretching from farms and factories to the camp gates, the disciplined yet humane guards overseeing it all. Each meal also carried subtle lessons about equity and control. Every prisoner was given the same portions. No favoritism or unfair distribution occurred. It was a silent demonstration of order and fairness, contrasting sharply with the rationed chaos of their own military experience. Over time, POWs began to eat without suspicion, to enjoy flavors they had not tasted in months or years, and to slowly absorb what the meals implied, that a nation's strength could be measured not only in weapons and tanks, but in the capacity to feed and sustain its people, and even its enemies. In the quiet moments between bites, some men reflected on the irony. They had come to America expecting punishment, fear, and continued deprivation. Instead, they were met with abundance, organization, and care. Even the desserts, a simple cake or pudding, felt revolutionary to men who had not seen sugar in years. For many, these meals became the first opportunity to restore both body and spirit. They learned that food could disarm, teach, and even transform perception. By the end of the first week, what began as shock evolved into a quiet respect for the system around them, a recognition that abundance was not accidental, but intentional. In every bite, the POWs encountered the evidence of American industrial might, logistical mastery, and a society capable of feeding its own while maintaining humanity toward others. What they had assumed to be a simple meal was in fact a message, one that would linger in memory long after the war, a testament to the power of sustenance and the unexpected lessons hidden on every plate.
As the days went by, the mess hall became more than a place to eat. It became a stage where ideology quietly unraveled. German POWs, once hardened by propaganda and the relentless messages of the Third Reich, began to notice things that unsettled their long-held beliefs. The abundance of food was one, but it was also the way it was provided. No one was berated for taking too much. No one was forced to endure punishment for minor infractions. Every soldier, regardless of rank or background, received equal portions. It was a lesson in fairness delivered through plates of steak, bread, and vegetables. Conversations between prisoners shifted as well. Instead of talking about battles lost or victories missed, they began to discuss the camp, the meals, and the efficiency with which everything was run. Some admitted in letters home that they had expected cruelty or neglect, yet what they encountered was order, kindness, and structure. The ideological impact of these meals cannot be understated. Men who had been told their enemies were ruthless and decadent now saw firsthand that care and abundance were part of the American system. The contrast with Germany's collapsing supply lines was stark. Soldiers remembered the thin soups, the meager rations, the endless struggle to find calories in a nation losing the war. Here, in Texas or the Midwest, food was plentiful, fresh, and prepared with care. It was impossible to ignore that this abundance was a reflection of national strength, industrial capacity, and logistical excellence. Some prisoners began to reflect quietly on their own beliefs.
How could a nation that treated its enemies with such decency wage war so effectively? The realization crept in slowly. Ideology and reality did not always align. Meals became symbolic. Every bite was a reminder that the United States could sustain millions, both civilian and military, and still provide for captured soldiers. The shock was not simply in the size of the portions, but in what those portions represented, a system functioning at a level Germany could not match even at the height of its power. Younger POWs were often the most vocal, comparing the camp to stories from home, to letters from soldiers still fighting in Europe, to memories of hunger and scarcity. Older soldiers, more reflective, recognized that the lessons of these meals extended beyond nutrition. They hinted at the broader consequences of industrial might and logistical mastery, the kind of advantage that could tilt wars without a single shot being fired. Over time, prisoners grew more comfortable in the mess hall, but the subtle impact of abundance lingered. Conversations shifted from disbelief to wonder. Some men quietly marveled at the efficiency, noting how every detail, from cooking to distribution to sanitation, was carefully planned. The organization of kitchens, the coordination of supply convoys, and the attention to nutrition were astonishing to men who had known only chaos and hunger. There was no chaos, no favoritism, no scarcity. It was a system that educated as much as it nourished. Even in moments of humor and camaraderie, there was a silent acknowledgement. Ideology was fragile in the face of evidence. These meals were not propaganda, but proof that a nation's capacity to care, to feed, and to sustain could challenge even the beliefs of those who had come to fight against it. And in that quiet realization, the prisoners began to understand something deeper, that the power of abundance could disarm, reshape thinking, and challenge the certainties they had carried across the Atlantic. The mess hall was no longer just a place to eat. It had become a space where perception shifted, where hunger met humanity, where the rules of war seemed temporarily suspended, and where the ideology of a collapsing Reich quietly cracked before plates piled high with food. Even years later, many would remember the taste, the smell, and the lessons hidden within those meals as a defining moment of reflection and disbelief.
By the time the weeks had passed, the German POWs had settled into a rhythm, yet the lessons of abundance continued to impress upon them in ways that extended far beyond food. Every meal reminded them of the logistical might of a nation capable of sustaining not only its military, but also millions of civilians and even its enemies. It became clear that what they were experiencing was not just hospitality. It was a demonstration of industrial power, of efficiency, and of organizational skill. Letters and diaries describe how the prisoners marveled at the consistency of the meals. Fresh bread daily, meat and vegetables prepared to maximize nutrition, and desserts that seemed almost luxurious to men accustomed to scraping together scraps. Each tray, each portion was a testament to a system that had learned to manage resources on a massive scale, and one that could deliver that scale across thousands of miles from farms and factories to camp kitchens. Beyond the physical nourishment, these meals became lessons in the broader realities of war. Hunger had been a tool in Europe, shaping the morale of soldiers and civilians alike. Here, in the United States, the ability to feed and care for even prisoners sent a subtle but powerful message about national strength. It was a reminder that victory was tied not only to weapons and tactics, but also to production, planning, and the welfare of those under one's control. POWs began to reflect on the contrast between the collapsing Third Reich, where rationing and scarcity dominated, and the meticulous efficiency they observed in American camps. They noticed how every detail, from supply convoys to kitchen organization, was carefully planned to ensure abundance. The contrast was stark, and it left an impression that extended beyond the mess hall. For many soldiers, these meals became a lens through which to understand a new kind of power, one that relied not on intimidation alone, but on capacity,
precision, and foresight. It was as if the abundance itself was a quiet form of psychological strategy, revealing a level of preparation Germany could not match. Some men described a lingering disbelief that such generosity could exist in wartime, that an enemy could provide care without expectation of immediate return. Others noted the subtle lesson in fairness. Every prisoner received the same portions, regardless of rank or reputation, underscoring the order and equity of the system. In the weeks that followed, the camp became not just a site of captivity, but a place of reflection. Men shared stories about what they had endured in Europe, contrasting their hunger and deprivation with the plentiful tables in front of them. For the older soldiers, the meals were a reminder that a nation's true strength lay in its infrastructure and organization, its ability to feed, supply, and sustain. Even after the war, these lessons would linger. Many former POWs would recount not just the physical sustenance, but the symbolic power behind it, the way food, logistics, and care revealed the depth of American capability. The final meals, as the prisoners prepared for repatriation, carried a bittersweet weight. They were full and nourished, but also acutely aware of the gulf between what they had experienced in Europe and what they had witnessed in America. The shock of abundance had become a permanent lesson. Victory is measured not only on battlefields, but also in the capacity to sustain life, in the care given to soldiers and prisoners alike, and in the quiet power demonstrated through order and provision. The POWs left with more than memories of food. They carried an understanding of a nation whose industrial strength and organizational skill could feed millions, care for its enemies, and subtly teach lessons in humanity, fairness, and strategic advantage. Hunger had followed them across continents, yet here, in a place they had once expected to find suffering, they had discovered abundance, and through it, the enduring power of a nation at the height of its capability, one that combined compassion with precision to create a force that was as human as it was formidable.